Right, so we are live. Um, Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you once again for joining us for tonight's edition of the Time with the Doctors. Now, tonight we are looking at COVID situation once again, 18 months on. Now, I'm honored as usual to have these precious doctors here with us. So I have my co-host, Dr. Lai, and I'm going to start with Dr. Bomblatt. So Dr. Bomblatt currently serves as a medical officer, team lead in the Division of Epidemiology at the U.S. Food and Drug Agency Center for Biologics Evaluation and Research. So she works as a vaccine safety and surveillance, including COVID-19 vaccine. Now, prior to that, she worked as a chief medical officer for research at the NIH, National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases. And she also worked on the HIV vaccine clinical trials. Welcome once again, Dr. Bomblatt. Thank you for making a date with us. And then I also have here Dr. Bertha Ayi. She's a clinical assistant professor of medicine at the University of North Dakota and the Kansas Health Science Center in the USA. She's also there's so many things. I'm just trying to skip. She was also involved in the University of Development Studies in Tamale, Ghana, and the University of Health and Allied Health Sciences in Ho, Ghana. She's the president-elect of the Ghana Physicians and Surgeons Foundation of North America after graduating from the University of Ghana Medical School, where she graduated with her medical degree. Thank you, Dr. Bertha Ayi, for joining us. I also have here Dr. Leonard Sowa. So Dr. Sowa is a product of the University of Ghana Medical School. After his training in Ghana, he studied for public health at Johns Hopkins University, where he focused on epidemiology and international health. He, after his training, also returned to Maryland to practice in multiple locations in the United States. He is a physician educator, so that means he's really good at talking about the medical sciences in a very friendly way. And he's been involved in working with physicians and students, both in the US and internationally, in the field of HIV. He's very much interested in working with the marginalized. And tonight we are privileged to have him here. He also took part in the independent review of some of the studies addressing COVID-19 and the development of the vaccine. In his role, he always stressed the need for including a more diverse population in these studies. Dr. Sowa, we are privileged to have you here this evening. Dr. Lai, Prof. Lai, do you want to introduce yourself briefly, my co-host?
So again, I don't need any introduction. As a co-host, I'm Jonathan Lai. I'm based in Arkansas, Little Rock, Arkansas, at the University of Arkansas here. And I will be co-hosting this afternoon session with Maud. And we are glad that you are here with us. A few months ago, we had the same panel talking about COVID, and we felt that with all the new things that are happening with COVID, we'll come back with an update to educate all of you regarding kind of what's happening with the vaccines and the surges that are happening all around the globe. And so, call your friends, call your family, and let's learn.
Amazing. Thank you very much. So, viewers, we would like to know where you are watching from. Please put it in the chat. Tell us where you are watching from. Call your family and friends, call your loved ones to join you as we educate ourselves. Now, just as my co-host rightly said, there's so much information out there, and sometimes it's really hard to know what is really true and what is just made up. But guess what? Tonight we have these knowledgeable doctors here, both females and males, and they're going to just answer all your questions and just to debunk some of the myths, hopefully, with regards to COVID-19. So my question to you, Dr. Sowa, if you're happy to start us off, is why is COVID still relevant still after 18 months? Why is it still relevant? Why do we have to come back? We did this a few months ago. Why do we have to come back today and still talk about it again?
Thank you very much for this question. And this is a very important question. And I think some of you, if you may remember, one president of IS said it was going to disappear. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. So the virus is still with us, and it's been with us for the past 18 months. At this point, a lot of people believe that, and I, including myself, believe that this virus is going to be with us for a very long time, and we wouldn't be able to get rid of it. One reason why the virus is still with us is that this virus is a very efficient virus, and it knows how to really be transmitted from one person to the other. And then the virus also changes. So since this pandemic started, the virus has changed multiple times, more than we can even count. And now we have a different type of virus that is in the system that is a little bit more transmissible than what we had from the beginning. And then also, most of us who were hoping that, oh, the vaccines will be here, we'll get a vaccine and get some control. That didn't happen. And there are a lot of reasons why the vaccine deployment didn't go as planned. A lot of it has to do with communication. A lot of it has to do with politicization of the whole COVID situation. So unfortunately, we hoped that things would be better by now. I was hoping that I was going to be in Florida having fun, not sitting here talking about COVID, but unfortunately it didn't happen. And it's mostly because a lot of people didn't do what we wanted them to do: get a vaccine, get protected. I'll stop here.
Thank you, Dr. Soa. So as we go on, I think the rest of the panel, if you have something to add, you can add as well. But I'll come to you, Dr. Ayi. So can you just give us a gist of any new treatments that we have for COVID, new drugs or treatments? Last time we spoke, I think there was only remdesivir. So can you update us on any new things?
All right. So thank you very much for having me on the program. At this point, one of the oral drugs is called baricitinib. It's been approved for use in hospitalized patients who are requiring high amounts of oxygen, so that if someone comes into the hospital and they're just on a small amount of oxygen, that medicine is not approved for them. But for those who have high oxygen requirements before they actually get into the intensive care unit. And for patients who happen to unfortunately become ventilated with mechanical ventilation requiring support with the ventilator, they are given one dose of a medication called tocilizumab, which is an interleukin-6 inhibitor. In addition to that, there's always the monoclonal antibody, which is being given as an outpatient to prevent admissions. Some data that was presented this week suggests that it can be used in the hospital to reduce the progression to the intensive care unit. And this week, Merck also announced its new drug called molnupiravir that they think will reduce the rate of hospitalizations by half. There are other companies like Pfizer and Lilly who also have similar drugs in the pipeline, but these have not been approved as of yet. And so there are a few other pills in the pipeline. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Ayi. Right. So, Dr. Bumblad, I know you are involved with working on the vaccines. So how many vaccines are available around the world?
Yeah, so as of my last count, this month, there were 23 vaccines that are available, either authorized or full licensure or approval worldwide. So the ones that most people know are AstraZeneca, Moderna, Pfizer. Those are the companies, Janssen. Those are most widely known. They have the largest market share currently, but there are other ones too that are pretty common in other parts of the world. So Sinopharm, a lot of people know Sputnik from Russia. There's CoronaVac. So there's quite a few of them that have either EUA licensure and or approval in a few countries. There are smaller ones that are not as commonly known, like EpiVac and Corona and CoviVac. And those have like EUAs in just 1 or 2 countries, so they're not very widely used. But we are in a really good position to have 23 different candidates because we've only been doing this for almost a year and a half since the clinical trials started. So I think that's just a testament to what happens when the world comes together to fight a pandemic.
So Dr. Soa, since we are talking about the vaccines, we know that, different places have access to the vaccines in different amounts. Is vaccine availability still an issue? I mean, talking about around the world, you can talk about the U.S. and other places. Is that still an issue?
Thank you for that question. Fortunately for the U.S., vaccine availability is not a problem. As of now in the U.S., most people who have the vaccines are begging or just trying all sorts of tricks, including trying to pay people to get vaccinated. So that's not a problem in the U.S. But and in most of Western Europe, really vaccine availability is not an issue, mostly because most of them already had contracts with the companies to supply the vaccines to them. The biggest areas where we have problems are the low and middle income countries. And when I say low and middle income countries, some of the low and middle income countries, like Dr. Bambla said, have actually managed to produce their own vaccines. So there they may not have an issue, or they may have, if they have an issue, it's just what they need to actually scale up their production, but they do not have such an issue. But most of Sub-Saharan Africa doesn't have good vaccine availability. The last time I checked, a lot of the countries in Sub-Saharan Africa were about mostly below 5% vaccination rate. And it's not because of hesitancy. It's not because people are afraid of the vaccines. A lot of those places, some who are lucky may have gotten their first dose, but some haven't gotten their second dose. The last time I checked in Ghana, they started rolling out the second doses for most people, maybe about a month or a few weeks ago. So things are getting better, but they are not where they should be. And then one thing about vaccine rollout is that the faster, the better. If you do it slowly, you give the virus a more chance to actually, start spreading whilst you are doing the vaccine rollout. So we hope that a lot of these countries will get access. One reason why we didn't have this type of access was the World Bank started a program that was supposed to make vaccines available to everyone. But unfortunately, a lot of countries didn't join. And when they joined, even they were not willing to actually make things easily available. Hopefully, this will work out in the long run and make vaccines easily available. India also getting its pandemic around the time when vaccine rollout was happening, also delayed some of the vaccine shipments across the world, because India was going to be a major source for a lot of these sub-Saharan and low and middle income countries. A lot of reasons why, but we hope that things will improve with time. I know that U.S. is sending vaccines around. I hope more countries will send vaccines to these places so that we can get what we call vaccine equity.
Thank you, Dr. Soa. Dr. Ayi, so my question is, should vaccinated people be wearing masks? And if so, why are they required to wear it?
Thank you for that question. Initially, when the vaccine rollout started, people who had been vaccinated thought, well, I could just throw away my mask, and they were advised to put it on. And I think over the course of time, it has been proven why they have to put on their masks. First of all, there's a phenomenon called breakthrough illness, where in spite of people being vaccinated, we're finding that they're still getting infected or coming down with COVID. It might be a mild illness, but it's still COVID-19 disease, all right. Some get ill enough to be admitted to the hospital. In the US, out of over 170 million doses that have been given, over 2,000 people who have been vaccinated have died from COVID-19, and another 11,000, at least the ones that have been fact, have been admitted to the hospital. So these are really small numbers, but it tells you that breakthrough disease is real. Secondly, people who have been vaccinated will still, because they can still get infected, maybe even if it's mild or moderate illness, they have high viral loads in their nostrils and they're capable of transmitting to others. So for the fact that they themselves could get infected, or maybe I can use we since I'm also vaccinated, for the fact that a vaccinated individual could still get ill and also transmit disease, it's important that everyone who is vaccinated still wears masks. And so that initial guideline of, okay, if you're all vaccinated, you can gather without wearing masks, it does not apply anymore. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So I'll come back to Dr. Soa. As you mentioned when you were talking about vaccine availability in the US, most of our problem is vaccine hesitancy and people refusing to take the vaccine. In the rest of the world, as you said, it's the availability of the vaccines. So, can you talk about some of the reasons which people have given for not wanting to take the vaccine? And in doing so, can you address those reasons?
Okay. Thank you very much for this question. So I'll start with going back in December. I did a short internet survey to get people's beliefs about vaccines. At that time, the vaccines were getting out, they've been rolling out among physicians and healthcare workers. And one of the biggest problems that people had was the fact that they thought the vaccines were produced too quickly. And then other people said, yes, I want a few people to get it and let's wait and see what happens to them. And a lot of these things, I can understand that, yes. But when it goes about 18 months and you're still waiting to see what happens, then I start to wonder whether you really are waiting to see what happens. When it comes to talking about it taking too quickly to get the vaccines produced, that was actually, I consider it a miracle. But it didn't take 9 months to get the vaccines produced. It took almost 2 decades, almost 20 years. The research has been going on for several years before this COVID started. And even the first SARS virus, the people who had done, the Moderna group, at least I knew, had worked and produced a sequence for the SARS-CoV-2 virus for an mRNA vaccine before this pandemic came out. So when the pandemic came out, they already knew that this could be used in that setting. So the moment they received the sequences, they knew what to do. They had most of the work already done, over 20 years of work. All they needed to do was put in the sequence, which actually the key that was going to actually produce the spike protein that we were all looking for as the one that was the likely one to be immunogenic. They knew that the spike protein was the one to go to. So a lot of the research didn't have to start from day one. They already had something done to build on. So it didn't happen too quickly. I'll say it was a miracle. It happened the way it was supposed to happen. The way the mRNA vaccine platform is supposed to work is that it's a plug and play vaccine production, where the moment you know the sequence, you can actually plug it in and set it out. All you needed to do was stabilize the sequence. Other people also start talking about being worried about adverse events. And so far, if you look at the adverse events rates, they've been fairly low. When I say adverse, I mean they're very severe, a very, very low rate. And we'll talk about that later on down the line. There are other things that I don't want to mention, but people talk about it, so I'll mention it. People believe that if you get a vaccine, you are getting the mark of the beast. I don't believe, maybe then all of us have the mark of the beast, but I don't believe anybody is getting the mark of the beast with the vaccine. It's not giving anybody the mark of the beast. And other people believe that you're going to get a chip that would they will use to track you and all that. It's just a vaccine. It's a solution. Where is the chip? So a lot of these things that people believe, I don't understand. But a lot of it is because there's a lot of misinformation on the internet. Instead of people going to their trusted doctors and healthcare workers and talking to them and saying, oh, what can you tell me about this vaccine? Well, I'm concerned about this, about the vaccine. What do you know about it? They don't do that. They're going on the internet. They say, I'm doing my own research. When I came to this country, they told us that if you're going to do research on the internet, you need to actually know a little bit more about the information you're going to get before you go in there. You need to know the sources. So, and even up to today, when I see something on the internet, the first thing I look at is the source. And because this issue has been very, very politicized, when I look at the source, I look at what is the politics of the person who is saying this. I'm not saying that it would impact me, but I want to know who is saying it. Go to CDC, go to your doctor's office web page. All the most of the medical providers in this country have web pages, and they have a lot of good information. The health department, they also have good information. Go there. That's where we need to get our information from. Let's not get information from the internet. All of this information is false. Facebook is trying to get rid of them, but they are always playing a catch-up game. So this is one very, very difficult problem that we need to solve. But hopefully, people are slowly. It's a slow process. I'm very, very I'm disheartened because of that. I know some of my colleagues in the clinic, including Dr. I always see people and they wonder why didn't they get a vaccine, and it's sad.
Thank you. So as we continue, I'll come back to you, Dr. Ayi. Let's say someone has already had the disease and recovered from it. Do they still need to be vaccinated? Because we hear some people say, well, I had COVID and I recovered, so I should have, antibodies, and so I don't need the vaccine. Should people who have recovered from COVID still get the vaccine?
Yeah, thank you for that question. And yes, they should. The CDC, through the MMWR or Morbidity and Mortality Weekly, recently released a study where they looked at a group, I believe it's from people from Tennessee or Kentucky, one of them, people who were getting repeat cases of COVID-19. And they were able to show that people who have just received, who just got ill from COVID and have not been vaccinated were 2.5 times more likely to get another case of COVID-19 compared to those who had COVID and had been vaccinated. So this is some data that shows that it's important to still get the vaccine after you've had a case of COVID-19. And also there are studies to show that if you've had COVID-19 and you get the vaccine, your immune response to the disease is much higher. And in other studies where they looked at purely healthcare workers who have recovered from COVID-19, some people with mild illness did not even mount an immune response at all, up to about a third of individuals. And even for those who mounted an immune response, after 3 months, their immunity had gone down considerably compared to those who had been vaccinated or who got COVID and then received the vaccine. And so at this point, the recommendation is that whether you've had COVID or not, as soon as you recover, go ahead and get the vaccine. So the chances of getting reinfected is still pretty good. So, and your chance of being infected is much higher if you get the vaccine. Thank you.
So as a follow-up, is there a time difference or a time interval between recovery and when you can get the vaccine?
In the past, when there was not enough vaccines, the thought was that enough vaccines and data, the thought was that you should wait for about 90 days. But as soon as you recover, you can go ahead and get the vaccine. The only caveat is that if you receive the monoclonal antibody as part of your treatment protocol when you got COVID, the thought is that you now have enough antibodies for a while, and so you should wait for 90 days before getting the vaccine.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ayi. Yeah, that's really relevant. So I want to wish a very special lady a very happy 16th birthday. Amale Layi, Professor Layi's daughter. Have a very happy 16th birthday. When I saw what your dad said you were doing today, I was just full of admiration and praise for you. So that's an amazing thing to do on your 16th birthday. I hope you have a very lovely day. And we all wish you the very best in life. And again, we have another person who is celebrating his birthday. So, Dr. Nicholas Che, we want to wish you a very happy birthday today. We hope you have a very lovely time with your family. I'd also like to say hello to Bertha Karimi for joining in. Thank you, Lily Kisi, for joining in. Bishop Steve May, thank you for joining in. Innocent Osei, thank you for joining in from Ghana. I hope I've not missed anyone else. Right, Dr. Bamla.
So let maybe before we go on,
Yeah.
there are a few questions there. So I think we can address some of them as we go along. So Bishop Steve Meyer from Suriname is asking, why is ivermectin rejected by the mainstream medical experts while its effectiveness to kill this COVID-19 virus is proven? So can we address that before we move on?
Okay, I can speak about this. So what ivermectin, the data that I'm pretty sure the data that Steve is talking about is preclinical data showing that yes, the ivermectin does reduce or does inhibit reproduction of the COVID virus. However, most of the studies that have been done, what we call clinical data done in humans, have not shown any benefit. And some of the studies are still ongoing, but at this point in time, the information that some of the studies is showing is that there is no additional benefit to using ivermectin. It's not like it's being rejected. It's just that there is no data now, and they are still collecting data, but the preponderance of the data suggests that it most probably would not be beneficial in COVID-19. And that's the reason why it's not being used widely.
Does anyone want to add anything to it?
Yeah, I'll also add that in clinical drug development, there are thousands of drugs that go through preclinical studies that look awesome, okay? But by the time you get from a drug in preclinical trials to clinical trial, the amount of drugs that it's like a pipeline, the number that make it is less than 5%. Okay. So if we took everything this is why companies aren't going to take everything that works in a petri dish and go and put their money into it because they will lose. So you have to be really careful with looking at, now that everything's on the internet, looking at a study and saying, well, everybody's ignoring this data. They're ignoring for a reason. It's because it doesn't work when it comes to the other side. So with things like this, what you do is that you wait until you have really good clinical trials, multiple ones of them, really good trials with lots of people that show without doubt that this thing works before people are going to invest in it. Yeah, ivermectin's already an approved drug for other indications, but you still have to show that it's efficacious and safe at the doses that would be required in humans. So just be really careful with preclinical data when you read things out there. It has a long way to go before anybody starts to believe that it can be used for a disease.
Thank you. So I think we can move on, and then we will answer the other questions, after we cover a few more questions.
All right, thank you. Dr. Bamblad, could you please talk us through a bit more about the types of vaccines available, please? Thank you.
Sure, yeah. So I think of vaccines as kind of 4 different buckets. There are kind of offshoots to each bucket, but I'll just keep it simple. And I'll say that when you think of vaccines, think about the 4 different ways that they work. So we have the inactivated or weakened virus vaccines. So this is a form of the virus that's been inactivated or weak so that it does not cause disease, but it still generates an immune response. So your body thinks that you have the infection, but it's weak and it can't really cause disease, and then you mount a response. The second bucket I think of is protein-based vaccines. So this would be taking a harmless piece or a fragment of a protein or protein shell of the COVID-19 virus, and then putting it in humans and getting them to safely generate an immune response. The other way that you could do it is you could take what we call a viral vector, right? So you take a piece of the COVID protein and you put it into another virus, so like your J&J or your AstraZeneca, and then this forms a safe virus that can't cause disease, but then again, it generates the immune response against the coronavirus proteins. And then lastly, like Dr. Soa said, we've had the mRNA kind of in the works for years, but this is really the first time where they took off and went into clinical trials and showed that they were really safe and efficacious. And these are the mRNA and sometimes the DNA in HIV vaccines. We have a lot of DNA vaccines. And these are going back one step further. So you give your body the mRNA. It's kind of like a message to your body saying, please make S protein. And then your body makes the S protein, and then that generates an immune response. So all of it is still your body reacting to something that was given to it in order to protect you ultimately from an insult that comes from the disease that could be a lot worse. And that's really all vaccines are. It's not that exciting. They're actually very boring until COVID happened, and then everyone started to say they could do things that they can't do. But yeah, that's really it.
So thank you. Can you then follow up with how effective these vaccines are, at least the ones that we know of?
Yeah, the main ones.
Yeah.
So yeah, I can talk a little bit about that. So when we think about how effective is a vaccine, there's something that confuses people a lot. So there's effectiveness and there's efficacy. And I know it's getting a little technical, but the reason this is important is because people will see something in a clinical trial that says this vaccine efficacy is 95%, right? And then they'll read on the internet that the effectiveness is down to 80%, and then they'll start saying, oh my goodness, the vaccine doesn't work or whatever. That's because you're measuring two different things. So efficacy is measured in a controlled environment, in a clinical trial. It's not really real world, right? The people are in a trial, so they behave differently than people in the real world. The other thing that affects effectiveness is what variant you're talking about, right? So if you're saying something's effective, against what variant? And then you have to say what your outcome is. Are you measuring effectiveness against infection or effectiveness against disease and hospitalization? So I'll give you an example. Pfizer, their mRNA vaccine is 94% efficacy in clinical trials, right? But that's efficacy in preventing disease against the wild type or the alpha strain. When you look at preventing infection, that efficacy is not 94, it's 86. Still really great, but it's a different number. And so that confuses people. And then when you look at preventing disease against beta, gamma, or delta, now you're 85%. And then when you look at preventing infection, which is kind of like the holy grail of vaccines, but not all vaccines prevent infection, and that's fine. But you're down to about 70, 75, 78%. And so that's really what you're looking at. When you see all these numbers, it's not that the vaccine is not doing what it's supposed to do. It's that now it's in the real world. And that's why we measure real world effectiveness against a different strain. So essentially, bottom line is that like the 6 top most used vaccines that we talk about all the time, they all have very high efficacy, higher than anyone expected in clinical trials. I mean, we're talking about flu vaccines that are in the 50s and some years in the 30s, and we still take them because they help, right? So now we're talking 90s, and so nobody should say, oh, well, I don't know, it was 90, now it's 86. It's really, really good. And I'll just say that I think, it's better to be in a pandemic with vaccines that have varying effectiveness depending on the variant than to be in a pandemic like the Spanish flu and have nothing. So that's really what you're talking about here when you talk about effectiveness.
Right. Thank you so much. Now, so your last words was about variant. How many different types of variants do we have, Dr. Bumler?
I think Dr. Soa.
Dr. Soa, but yeah, I mentioned some of them. Dr. Soa.
what I'll say is that when it comes to variants, we are looking at how different the virus is compared to the original virus that the sequence that came from the Wuhan strain. And a lot of times they look at how different the sequence is compared to them, and then they come out that this is a variant. Overall, when you're looking at it, there are many variants, but the ones that are being named are the ones that are considered variants of concern, meaning that when they look at the sequence of, when they look at the clinical activity of this particular virus, it's different from the original one. And then also when they look at the infectivity, it is different. So overall, what I'll say is that the number that as far as I know, they have the alpha, they have the beta, they have the gamma, and then they have the delta. And then I knew there was a lambda and an epsilon. But so far, I think the lambda and the epsilon, they don't think they are going to make a much difference when it comes to clinical activity and also when it comes to infectivity. So far, when we worry about variants, the one that we worry about is mostly delta. And I'll say over the course of 3 to 4 months, most countries in the Western world have more than 90% of their sequences being delta. And when you see that, that tells you that the delta is very, very efficient. And it's pretty much when the variant is that efficient, what it does is that it actually knocks out all the other variants. At this point in time, that's what the variant that we are most concerned about. We don't know, nobody knows what's going to happen because it's the virus that determines, unfortunately. The virus keeps changing. It's something that is in its DNA. It changes its sequence. And when it changes its sequence, if it's an advantageous sequence, then it starts getting increase in the numbers. So overall, nobody can tell you how many variants. There are a lot of variants, but the ones that we worry about are the ones that I mentioned.
So, Dr. Soa, to continue, so what brings about these variants? Like you were saying, the virus changes. So the question is, how does the virus know to change, or what triggers that change?
So one thing about viruses is that different viruses have different mechanisms of making sure that the sequence stays as close to what it is supposed to be as possible. Change is good, but change can be bad. So what happens is that the virus has what they call a proofread, makes errors in its reading of the mRNA. And then on top of the errors, there's a proofreading mechanism that actually corrects the errors. So depending on how many errors occur in the reading of the mRNA and how many errors are corrected in the proofreading mechanism, you can have changes in the sequence. Some of the changes are bad, meaning that you have a new sequence that is not compatible with being able to reproduce. And that would actually be a variant or a sequence that is not going to become very, very popular. A sequence that is popular is the one that tends to reproduce more. And that's one thing that we find about the Delta. When you look at the number of people get infected with Delta, the number of virus particles that they see in their nasopharynx is about 1,000 times what you see in the original Alpha variant. So if in a community, you have people who have both Alpha and the Delta, over time, because the Delta is able to reproduce more, it's going to wash it out. So it's something that happens. The virus always makes mistakes, and the mistakes are corrected. But sometimes the mistakes tend to be good for the virus. Sometimes the mistakes tend to be bad for the virus. I hope that is clear enough.
Yes, thank you. Maybe we can answer this question since you put it up, Dr. Bombay. The question is, would a time come when a vaccine would be produced to be able to combat any variant that pops up?
Like a super vaccine? I'm not hopeful, because, when a vaccine is made, currently the vaccines are targeting the S protein, right? If a variant changes its S protein, the vaccine may not work. So then you're back to the drawing board. We've been really, really blessed. Like God has been good to us in that so far. For example, the Delta hasn't, tweaked itself so much that the vaccines are, they're still effective against Delta. But you just never know. Your vaccine is made against a part of the virus. If the virus changes that part, your vaccine is going to be either less effective or not effective at all. We see this every year with the flu vaccine, right? It's like we're chasing our tails. Every year the flu does something different and we're trying to keep up. So if this acts like a normal coronavirus in terms of changing and being ubiquitous, and then now we have it being endemic rather than a pandemic, I doubt very much that we could have just one vaccine that would just take care of any variant that came about. But we can pray.
I would add something. Yes, we would not have a vaccine that it's not likely, but that's when I talked about the mRNA vaccine. It's a plug and play mechanism, meaning that all you need is to get a new sequence, stabilize the sequence, and start a new trial. Unfortunately, yes, you still have to do a trial to be sure that it still works, but it makes the steps a lot more easier to actually get a new vaccine in case it gets to the point where the current vaccines do not recognize the spike protein the way the new spike protein in the variant.
Thank you. I want to say hello to Pastor Martin Karimi. Hello to Pastor James Samo from Kenya. Say hello to Augustine Amwako. Thank you for joining in. Hello, Pastor Terence. Thank you once again for joining. Hello, Pastor Paul. Thank you for joining in. And to Innocent Osei, thank you once again for joining us. And Veronica. Veronica, where are you watching from? We would love to know where you're watching from. Please tell us. Thank you. Right, Dr. Ayi. So I have a question for you here. I've been hearing so much about the Delta variant. So is the Delta variant, is it more deadly or is it more infectious?
Yeah, thank you for the question. It's not more deadly, but it is definitely more infectious, or better still, able to spread faster. And just to add to what Dr. Soa was saying, and maybe to bring it home to most people, at least we're all probably familiar with eating oranges. The same oranges from an orange tree. If you go and find a bunch of oranges in the grocery store in town, they don't look exactly the same. You could tell that these are all oranges, but you might pick one that is sweeter than the other, and maybe they're from the same tree, really. If it so happens that customers find out that this particular orange tastes sweeter, farmers might produce more of it, or people will tend to go for that one. Maybe they're even from the same farm. And so it is with the variants. This time I'm using sweetness as a character, but or as a defining, characteristic of the Delta variant. But the fact that it's able to spread more has allowed it to become more than 90% of the circulating strain. It doesn't make it any different from the rest. It's just that its genetic sequence is just slightly different, and so it's considered a variant of concern. And it's no more deadly than the rest of the viruses.
So let's continue with you, Dr. Ayi, as we talk about the variants and stuff. What is driving the current surges in COVID-19? So it looked like at some point we were winning this war on COVID-19. I mean, numbers had come down dramatically to the point where people felt, people actually talked about it in the past, as if during the pandemic, as if we are out of the pandemic. And then all of a sudden, we see numbers rising and we see more hospitalizations and more deaths. What is driving this, the surge that we are seeing around the world?
Okay. So I think we can look at it in various ways, especially since this pandemic is not localized to one particular region, maybe Africa or Asia or the US. I can use some general terms. You look at the outbreak in Europe, for example. I believe Spain and maybe even the UK, they've shut down a few times where nobody's going out. There was a time when Spain had a really high spike of cases. They were showing us all these people who were dying and being buried, and they closed down all economic activity. And then I believe July of last year, they said, oh, we're open up to everybody. You can come in because our tourism is going down. And then there was another wave, and then they closed down again. So I think what is happening, or even look at the US in the summer. Okay, because summer is coming as of May 1st, now everybody can go out and mingle with people if you're vaccinated. And lo and behold, we had another spike. So I think what is happening is, one, a lack of consistency in maintaining or holding the virus down with, specific public health measures. Part of it may be the Delta variant, and also the fact that we're not up to that 80% herd immunity. In the US, only about 55% of people are fully vaccinated. In parts of Africa, it's less than 2%. So it's several factors, but I think we need strong leadership, consistency in applying mask mandates. 1 minute you can take off your mask, the next minute, oh, put it back on. We think the cases are good. So it's almost as if all the time we're behind the power curve in terms of making firm recommendations for people, for the public to follow. So I think it's a multitude of factors.
Right, Dr. Bumblad, I have a question for you. So, based on the first program we held, I made an informed decision to be vaccinated. So I had my first jab, got poorly for a couple of days, recovered, went back to work, everything was fine. And then I had my second jab and everything was fine. And guess what? A few months down the line, I got COVID. And my question is, why did I even have to get vaccinated? So what is the point? Why are people who've been vaccinated, why are they still getting infected? And that's my question for you.
Good question. I'm glad you're still with us, which means that your vaccine works to prevent death and hospitalization in you, right? So that's one good thing. So remember when we talked about vaccine efficacy and effectiveness, right? Earlier, we discussed that the vaccines are effective against severe disease and hospitalization, but have a slightly different effectiveness against infection. So we don't have a vaccine that's 100% effective. Nobody is surprised that we have breakthrough infections. We knew from clinical trials and from real world data that even in the best case scenario, you have a 94, 95% efficacy. That means that if you have 100 people who got vaccinated, 5 of them got infected, right? That's what the 95% comes from. So if they're exposed to disease, a small percentage will get it. Also remember that efficacy is affected by the strain. So now that we have the Delta strain that has slightly less efficacy, although really still good, more people who are vaccinated are getting infected. So yes, vaccinated people can still get infected, but what are the rates? That's really what's important, right? So currently we have a breakthrough rate. It's difficult to classify, but we're seeing anything from 0.1% to 0.9% about in terms of breakthrough rate. And then even among those who do get infected, the vast majority of them are never hospitalized. A lot of them are just asymptomatic or have very mild disease. And of the few that do end up hospitalized or dying, these are people over age 65 with a lot of comorbidities. And so I guess bottom line is that it's still important to protect yourself, right? Dr. Ai said you still should mask. You still, just because you're vaccinated doesn't mean that you're 100% protected. It's kind of like, just because you got your flu vaccine doesn't mean you don't wash your hands. Like, you still have to wash your hands. You still have to make sure you're not with other people. But even if you do get infected, having done all of these things, the vaccine is still doing what it was supposed to do, what it says on the label that it does, which is that it prevents very effectively against severe disease and hospitalization. And so, I mean, it's kind of a risk benefit, right? You decide, you're like, well, do I want to get COVID-19 without the vaccine on board? Or do I want to get it with the vaccine on board? If that does happen, in the 0.1% chance that does happen, which is very, very small, you're still protected. So I would say it's still the better route to go than to take your chances and get the disease, because you don't know what's going to happen to you if you do get the disease.
So thank you for that, Dr. Soa. So Dr. Bomblatt kind of discussed the effectiveness and efficacy. So does the effectiveness of the vaccines wane with time? I mean, and you can discuss it the way she discussed it, whether it's with preventing disease or severe disease and hospitalization. I mean, does that wane with time? Is it a time issue?
So one thing about the vaccine is that when we are talking about effectiveness, the things that go into the equation can be very, very different. Efficacy, we are talking about clinical trial situation. The patients may be a lot different from the ones that you're going to see in real world. In a real world setting, you're getting everybody, the cancer patient, the HIV patient, you're getting the 90-year-old, you're getting the 100-year-old, all getting the vaccine. And then you're going to look at, okay, of all these people that got a vaccine, how many of them would get infected? And as Dr. Bomblatt and even Dr. Ayi said, you do realize that some people who are older may be more likely, even with the vaccine, to get infection. So if in your population you have a lot more of these individuals, you would actually see what we consider as a lower effectiveness of the vaccine. It doesn't mean that the effectiveness itself is going down. It means that the variables that go into the equation is what is causing you to have this number. And then there's another variable in the equation, which is the virus itself. So the virus itself, as we have talked about, the virus itself changes. So now you have a virus that when you get infected, it will I'm going to use just a rough number. It puts in your nasopharynx, you're going to get 1,000 copies of the virus in your nose. And now you have a different variant where it's not going to be 1,000 copies, it's going to be 1,000,000 copies. So when you in the setting of 1,000 copies as opposed to 1,000,000 copies, if you get in contact with somebody with 1,000,000 copies, even if you are vaccinated, your likelihood of getting infection goes up. So this is in a case where the same vaccine, but it's meeting a virus that is producing a lot more copies of the virus in the infected person. So the likelihood of somebody who's been vaccinated getting infected and even showing symptoms goes up. And that would actually reduce the effectiveness of the vaccine. It means that the number comes down, not because the vaccine changed, not because that anything is waning. What brought it down is the virus. And then time. Time is always something that is an unknown. In this area, when we talk about time, most of the time, when we're looking at the individuals that have impaired immunity, individuals who have multiple comorbidities, individuals that are above 65, we are realizing that their antibodies are dropping much faster than we expected, and that could actually mean that they may be more likely to get infected if they come into contact with the virus. I think that's one reason why the FDA and the CDC is actually recommending that such individuals get what they call a booster. I know a lot of people are talking about third dose versus booster. That it doesn't really matter. The issue is that some of us will need to get another shot to pretty much remind our body that, yes, you got a vaccine, wake up. And we are learning as time goes on. It's not that the vaccine is less effective, it's just that the situation has changed. The variables have changed, and the numbers that you're going to see in effectiveness is going to go down as a result.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Soa. So, Dr. Bomblatt, is there anything like having third doses of the vaccine? And if so, who should be getting it?
Yeah, so there's kind of a confusion between third doses and booster doses. So I'll just talk a little bit about both. So third dose is what you talk about when you have a two dose primary series, right? So for the mRNA vaccines, the current recommendation in the U.S. And England is that a third dose of at least 28 days after the second dose should be given in immunocompromised patients, because data came out that they do not seem to mount an adequate immunological response to the initial series. So that's really what you call a third dose. The booster dose is, the recommendation is a booster of at least 6 months after the second dose in those age 65 and over, and that was more recent. That came out for us at high risk of severe disease or high risk of occupational exposure, so healthcare workers or teachers, etc. So this is because the companies had some new data from clinical trials and some real world that in some people, the initial kind of robust immunity is beginning to wane, like Dr. Sowa said, and there are various reasons for that. So we don't necessarily know the clinical significance of that waning in terms of what the protection, you have what we call in science the correlates of protection. Like, we don't know what it is that actually protects people or what level yet, but we do know that people are protected. And so the booster is an attempt to get ahead of that and say, you know, give people a boost 6 months after the second dose so that their immunity can be kind of revved up a little bit. And we do this with other vaccines, right? You get your tetanus and then you get a booster. So that's really, really what the booster is. And that's why there's that 6 months if you had an initial immune response for the booster versus the third dose. So different governments are navigating this booster issue differently. So, you know, some are worried about equity issues, some are worried about access issues. And so there's going to be different recommendations across the board. But at least for us in the US and for England, the recommendation is to get a booster for these groups of people 6 months after the primary series.
Dr. Sowa, there's a question here for you.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they talk about the fact that research was ongoing about SARS-CoV, so it contributed to the fastness of. What I'll say is that yes, the research was ongoing. What they did was that they developed the sequence, they put it in the vaccine, but then in that case, the virus went down, so they didn't get a chance to do it clinically. They didn't go to the clinical step. So they already had gone through the process of stabilizing the sequence. And they've gone through the process of figuring out that, oh, you need to put a nanoparticle envelope around it. So when the new virus came, they'd already had an idea how they would have addressed the old virus, and they quickly started working on that idea.
So
it did contribute to the fastness of getting things done.
So let me also kind of address it, because I think there's a little bit of misunderstanding from the question, the person asking the question, that when Dr. Sowa talked about the fact that they had worked on the vaccine, it was for SARS-CoV-1. So coronaviruses are a very ubiquitous group of viruses. I mean, they cause minimal symptoms, but when the SARS, the original SARS that happened, you know, about 2002, when that happened, that's when they were developing the mRNA vaccine. So when he talks about that, that is not COVID-19. The coronavirus that's causing COVID-19 is SARS-CoV-2, right, or CoV-2. So it's a different variant of the SARS virus or coronaviruses. So I think the whole point is that what he was talking about is not COVID-19. I mean, it's not the SARS-CoV-2 virus. It's the other one, which is also a type of coronavirus. And so they had developed a mechanism for coming up with a vaccine. So now if we get a SARS-CoV-3 or 4, the platform is already developed. All they need to do is to find out what part of that particular virus is causing the disease, and then they will be able to manufacture the virus and the vaccine against that particular part of the virus. So we shouldn't confuse the two. That the original SARS was a different virus, but it's still a coronavirus, right? And so I think that's the I hope that answers that question. And then Bishop Steve is asking this question about graphene oxide. I would just answer it. The answer is no. Unfortunately, somebody, some doctor who is actually not even a scientist, a doctor of psychology, came up with a video saying that the Pfizer BioNTech vaccine contains 99% graphene oxide, and they are murdering people. We've had 170 million doses of vaccines given, and the number of people that have died is less than 0.00001%. So there is absolutely no graphene oxide in that. If you look at the label, there is nothing like that in there. It's just people who are trying to cause problems, who are advancing these mistruths and untruths, falsehoods. So I think we'll just continue with that.
And just to add to Jonathan's explanation of the last but one question, I think the crux of it was not just to clarify if the technology was there before, but his question was, did they know about the outbreak? And the answer is no. Yeah. They didn't know about the outbreak. It's just technology being present, and so you can rapidly apply some, what to use to fix something else. I mean, people would like to believe. It's just like when the outbreak came out, somebody put a video saying they had looked at Lysol and the container says it would work against coronaviruses, and so they knew about it. And it was just so basically wrong, because like Jonathan said, we know that coronaviruses do cause the common cold sometimes. It's just not the SARS-CoV-2. So the Lysol bottle was just referring to the fact that Lysol can kill common cold viruses. But somebody sent that video around, and surprisingly, people actually believed it. That, oh yes, Lysol was made because they knew that there was going to be an outbreak. And just to clarify the part about people saying that they worked on the vaccine too quickly, or that the results, irrespective of the technology that was available, if this was an outbreak where very few people were getting ill, it would take forever to prove that the vaccine works. But because we were in the middle of a pandemic, if we had time, I would have shown you some of the graphs. But it became so obvious that those who had received the vaccine in the clinical trials were not getting ill, and those who had not received the vaccine had high rates of infection. And so quickly they put the data together, and it was clear that the vaccine was protective. So I always ask people, if you're trying to test out a new vaccine for cholera, or maybe cholera is so common, but like chicken pox in America, it will take you forever, because you just can't find people transmitting chicken pox. And so you will take 10 to 15 years. But if you're in the middle of a pandemic where so many people are getting infected every week and people are dying, you would quickly be able to prove that you have something that protects people. And so it's sort of like maybe you're testing out a skin cream that prevents dryness. If you try it in Accra during the Harmattan, you would get your results very quickly, because everybody's skin is dry, and you would be able to prove that, oh, this cream works, versus you're trying to try it in Canada in the winter season or summer or something. You would never get your results. So I just want people to understand that nobody's trying to play tricks with anyone, and that people just need to realize the fact that the vaccine is effective, except for a few breakthrough cases, and remove some of the doubts and cobwebs and go ahead and get vaccinated if you live in an area where the vaccine is readily available.
Now, just a little input from me. So I said I had COVID, and guess what? I knew someone else who also had it around the same time, but she hadn't had the vaccine at all. So afterwards, when we met, we just had a chat, and we're just like, I was a bit upset, to be honest. So we're just comparing symptoms to see. And I could tell you by far that I was protected because the symptoms that she experienced, I in no way, I didn't even have to go to the hospital, but she at one point in time actually had to go to the hospital. So yeah, please go for it if you can. Thank you.
Okay, so Dr. Bombla, I know you talked about the third dose. Can you and Dr. Soa kind of mentioned the confusion about third dose versus booster dose. Can you just clarify what's the difference between a third dose and a booster dose? Isn't that the same?
Mhm. Sure. So third dose is the dose that you receive after a 2-dose series. So you get your first dose of, let's start with Pfizer. You get your first dose, and then after 3 weeks, you get your second dose. The third dose is after another 3 weeks, you can get that third dose. And that is recommended for people who are immunocompromised. And the reason is that data came in that they didn't really have a great response the first time in terms of mounting an immunity. So that third dose is really for that category of people. The boost is different. And this is recommended for 6 months after your primary series. So you get your first dose, after 3 weeks, you get your second dose, and then 6 months, you get the booster. And that's for a different reason. So the primary series worked, and if you're immunocompetent, you have your antibodies, everything like that. But data is coming out now that you have what we call waning immunity, right? So your immunity is kind of going down, and that's what the booster is trying to address, which is if your immunity is going down, you boost it back up to where it was, hopefully in the primary series after that third dose. It's just that both of them happen to be 3, but one of them is for a different reason. It's a third dose, and one of them is a booster for something that worked initially.
And maybe Jonathan, Dr. Lai, just to add to that, again, we don't have the ability to share slides at this time, but there's clear data presented if you Google on the CDC website, looking at the various lectures they've given over the past few weeks, that in some patients who, like the transplant patients, people who had stem cell transplants, kidney transplants, etc., after the second dose, they had not mounted any. About 40% of them had there was no evidence to show that they had even been vaccinated. And in some series, they were making up to 60% of the breakthrough cases. So I know we're saying breakthrough. You might think that, oh, it's the usual Tom, Dick, and Harry, like Mrs. Latte, who was getting breakthrough. But a lot of them are these heavily immunosuppressed patients who got the vaccine, and if you check their antibodies, etc., it was almost like they did not get vaccinated. But then after they got the third dose, their immune system shut up a little bit. So the third dose is almost like, you know what, for this class of people, this is what you need. This is your must do or mandatory schedule. If you haven't received the third dose, you haven't completed your vaccination, versus the booster, which is in a way almost optional. Like the booster is for those above the age of 65 and high-risk healthcare workers. So almost all of us on this forum, we should be thinking about getting our booster doses if we want to. It's not mandatory. Nobody's going to hold you to it, but it's advised that if you're a healthcare worker, you should go ahead and get a booster dose just to make sure that because you're a frontline worker, you are fully protected. But it's not a mandatory third dose like people with hematopoietic, stem cell transplants, or who are on heavy immunosuppressive medications, against whom the vaccine almost, in some of them, it didn't do anything. It was like they never got the vaccine at all. So I think it's important to make that difference. And I see someone was also asking that, are all the vaccines the same in terms of potency? Here in Ghana, are we using the same vaccine as the USA or the UK, or is it the same vaccine the whole world is using? I don't know if I'm echoing. I think I can hear an echo. But no, not everybody in every part of the world is using the same vaccine. The US was using mostly Pfizer, the Moderna and the Johnson and Johnson vaccine, while other parts of the world were getting the Covishield. UK was using AstraZeneca and so forth. So, no, we're not using the same vaccine. And about long-term detrimental side effects, I don't know what people are classifying as long-term, but I always give this example. If your house is burning and you bring a truck, a fire service truck, to deliver water to shut the fire down, you're not going to ask, is this a Mercedes truck or a Toyota truck? Will they lose their parts in the future? Will the shock absorbers go down? Like, at that point, your role is to shut the fire down. We're in the middle of a pandemic and you could get severe COVID-19 disease. But I see people asking about 5, 10, 15-year long-term side effects, when at which point COVID might not be an issue anymore. So I think we should focus on the fact that the main side effects, a few people get an anaphylactic reaction. Some people, young people between 19 and 40, get this myocarditis or heart muscle inflammation. It's a very, very small number. And so far, most of the people who receive the vaccine are still walking around without any long-term detrimental side effects. So if that's your reason for not getting the vaccine, I just want to reassure you out there. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Dr. Ayi, for tackling that question. Yeah. I like the analogy of the fire service. I don't know if someone is able to reiterate, because unfortunately we had a bit of feedback. So Dr. Sowa or Dr. Lai, are you able to reiterate the point she made, please?
Yes. So essentially, the first point that she was making was that the people who are immunosuppressed or immunocompromised. So she mentioned things like people who've had transplants, like either kidney transplant or liver transplant or stem cell transplant. Okay, so anytime someone has a transplant, typically they've had a foreign, someone else's organ in their body. Now, the body will always reject that organ because our bodies, I mean, God made us such that we can identify what is self and what is foreign. So if you put someone else's kidney in someone, the body is going to reject it. But to avoid that rejection, they are put on immunosuppressive medication. So that it suppresses their immune system so that their body does not reject the transplant. Okay. So in these individuals whose immune system are already suppressed because of the medications they are on or because of some treatment that they got, so they are not able to mount an immune response when you give them the vaccine. So the same dose that you and I get will not be enough, will not be adequate to mount an immune response. And therefore, they need a third dose. And she was sharing the studies that showed that, you know, after the first 2 doses, some of them did not even have any antibodies at all. But after the third dose, you could see some of them having that. And I think the allegory about the fire at your house, like when you have a fire in your house, what you are really concerned with is putting out the fire and not wondering if the water is going to soak into your baseboard or anything like that. And so at this point, we are not necessarily concerned about long-term side effects. The short-term side effects of the vaccines, I mean, there are 2 major ones that we talked about. You know, the anaphylactic reaction, which is very rare, and then also the myocarditis, which is inflammation of the heart muscle. But even that is very rare, and those who've had it, you know, I mean, essentially are doing okay. Most of them are doing okay. So that's just a gist if you didn't hear what she said.
Let me add that
Thank you.
when it comes to long-term side effects of vaccines, is something that the FDA is very worried about. So they tend to actually have studies that looks at it. You know, they're getting data from different people who've had vaccines, and they really have realized that most of the vaccine side effects are seen within 6 months of getting the doses. So yes, we can worry about the long-term side effects, but the fact is that it's not something that has been seen to be a big problem. It's really, really very rare to actually find long-term side effects of vaccines. Most of the side effects are seen within 6 months.
Okay, thank you.
So can we put Bishop Myers' question about Israel? Can we address that, Dr. Bomblatt? Can you also elaborate on what's happening in Israel, where 94% of severe cases and deaths are among fully vaccinated?
Yeah, sure. So Israel is an interesting experiment. They did an awesome job giving their population Pfizer for those who were eligible. So Israel presented their data to us, and then it's kind of all published and everything. But they went ahead and they were able to get up to 80% vaccination rate in those who were eligible. But their children were not, well, one, they're not eligible, but they also weren't very interested in having a nationwide push for that. So you have the perfect storm for Israel, right? They vaccinated early. And then according to the prime minister, he said, everyone's vaccinated. We've done really well, amazing. Everyone go out and enjoy your new life, in the pandemic. So really there was no mask mandate. There was none of that. And then the third storm, Delta, hit, right? So you've been vaccinated earlier, you have waning immunity, you have no real masks, people are congregating with other people who are not vaccinated, and then you have Delta. And yes, they started having a huge problem, what they're calling their fourth wave. But what's really interesting about Israel is that they have very little vaccine hesitancy. So when they started to boost, they were the first real country that just went ahead and boosted even without seeing any data, clinical trial data. They went ahead and boosted with Pfizer. And now they're able to show us their data that they've been able to cut down infections and hospitalizations with a boost by about 85%. So yes, it's true that they, weren't expecting to have so much breakthrough, but what they were able to do was to show that if they did go ahead and boost, now their numbers are coming down. That's the first thing with Israel in terms of being a great case study for what a country does. The other thing to remember is that when you have a high vaccination rate, okay, so you have a pot, there's only X amount of, say marbles in that pot. The more marbles in that pot that are vaccinated, the higher the percentage of people who get infected will be vaccinated people, right? So it doesn't mean more people are getting vaccinated. It's just your full N is now more vaccinated people. So of course, everyone who gets infected is vaccinated because everyone's vaccinated. So you really have to, when you see statistics, I just plead with you to think about what it's actually saying and what it's not saying. Okay, so people like to play with things like that on social media. Oh, all these vaccinated people are getting infected. Well, that's not actually what it's saying. What it's saying is if you have a closed system like Israel and most people are vaccinated, most people who get infected will be people who were vaccinated. It doesn't mean the actual numbers are high. So that's one thing. And actually the US is we're really looking to see why it is that they have a much higher breakthrough rate with Delta in their population than we do. Granted, they're a homogenous population for the most part, right? The US and England and other places have more of a mix of races and genes in the pool. But we still don't completely understand why they had such high rates of breakthrough because we're not seeing that here. So that's my short answer to Israel. We're still looking at it.
Dr. Ayi, do you want to add something to that?
Yeah, I think that sometimes we could take the question as a fact. I mean, I just, with all due respect to the bishop, 94% of COVID-19 severe cases and deaths were not among the fully vaccinated. It wasn't. No. It was about 50% or so. But then you would realize that going back to the same patients with transplants and immunocompromised, most of these people were above the age of 65, which we know even before COVID. It's just like, and I'll use two examples: pregnant people, pregnant women, and elderly people. We know that even when there's no epidemic or pandemic, when people turn 65, they're more likely to get shingles because their immune system has gone down. So chickenpox that they had when they were 2 years old, suddenly 60 years later will flare up on their face or their skin. It's not even a question of, it does happen. And that's why we have the shingles vaccine. We also know that way before COVID, if somebody is pregnant, they're more likely to get a worst case of influenza. They're more likely to get the worst case of the H1N1 or SARS or whichever, SARS virus came out. When you're pregnant, your immune system goes down, which is what we're finding even in the SARS-CoV-2, this pandemic, that pregnant women are getting severe illness. So that's not rocket science. So if we find that in Israel's population, those above the age of 65 were getting the breakthrough illnesses, it's not surprising, which is why in the US, at this point, the recommendation is for those above the age of 65 to go and get the booster shot to prevent what's happened in Israel. So it doesn't mean that the vaccines don't work. It just means that it's playing on what we have known to be people's response to infections when they're growing up and their immune system is going down. And even in the US, it looks like more than 80% of the deaths have been in people who are above the age of 65.
And also for the Israel data, about 40% of the people who were infected were immunocompromised. So it's not just, there are a lot of reasons why these people were getting infections. And as Dr. Ayi and Dr. Bambla said, the numbers were not that many, but yes, when you look at the percentage, you're going to get scared, and it's about 56% of those vaccinated.
Yeah. I also wanted to add back to Dr. Soa's point where he said, question everything when you read it. One source to go to this is that the Israeli folks who are kind of heading their national health system, they came and presented all their data to the US FDA, and it's actually online. You can just look it up, because we had our deliberations about boosters about a week and a half ago, and all of that is videotaped. It's online. You can just go to FDA and .gov and look up, the advisory committee, and all that data will be there presented for them. And no, it was not 94%. So just make sure you fact check before really promulgating things that may not have come from reputable sources.
Thank you. And that's why, viewers, I think it's really important that we share this information, because it's really amazing how the wrong information spreads so quickly. It spreads so quickly. It's so common to lay your hands on, and then you read it and you actually think, what is happening? But that is why it's really important to share this information. Dr. Soa, could you recommend any website or something that we could get some good information from, so I could put it underneath these comments for future references? Is there any good website that we could actually go and check?
One thing I also say is that, whenever I'm looking for information, I always go, and some people may be biased, but I always go to the CDC website first. And the reason why I do that is because a lot of the work that is done when it comes to disease control goes to CDC. So depending on where you live, your state health departments also have a website. So I can put in some of in the chat, but the state health departments also have websites. The country governments also have health care websites that you can always look at. That allows you to make sure that the information that you're getting is always the best information available in your area.
Okay, so it looks like we are coming towards the end of our time, but we will maybe ask a couple of questions, and then we'll make sure that we've covered the questions. So I think the last two questions will come to you, Dr. Bomblat. Can you talk about where we are with vaccinating children? So vaccines for children, and then also address kind of why, after 18 months and maybe 10 months of having vaccines, In the US, for example, we only have one that is fully FDA approved, and we are still under emergency use authorization for the other two.
Sure. So children can just be really brief. There are ongoing studies in children. Pfizer recently announced that their vaccine is safe and efficacious at the doses given to children ages 5 to 12. So we think that they'll be seeking authorization and approval, which is usually what companies do once they announce these things publicly. Currently in the US, Pfizer has emergency use authorization in children 12 to 17. So they're being vaccinated with Pfizer. Moderna still has not yet, but Moderna does have ongoing clinical trials in young children as young as age 5. J&J also has ongoing trials in adolescents. We expect that the sponsors will begin to submit emergency use authorizations and or licensure for children. And regulatory agencies all over the world will review the data, and if it's supportive, then they usually grant authorization first and then approval. Some countries go straight to approval, but studies are ongoing in children younger than 12. But in some countries, children from 12 to 17 can get these vaccines. And then in terms of why not full approval, well, I mean, the regulatory process in any country takes a while, right? You have people who need to review the data. You have, after they review the data, it goes through multiple levels of overlook again, and then you have the regulatory systems that need to go through. And so, in some countries, some of these vaccines are already given full approval, right? So AstraZeneca is fully approved in Canada, Brazil, and Australia, but not in the US. Pfizer has approval for adults in the US, but also many other countries. It's actually leading, and it has approval in about 10 countries. Moderna has approval in 4 countries, and then is seeking authorization in others. So the regulatory process, you want it to take a long time, right? You don't want a company to be able to just give their data to a regulatory agency and then the next day gets approved. That means that somebody didn't read through the 1,000-page study that they did. So that's one reason. But also, the reason to wait is that these vaccines are being given in other countries, and that countries inform each other, right? So they talk to each other and they say, when you gave it to millions of people in your country, what happened? What were the side effects? What were that? And those all go into approval. And then just to remember that the people who are doing this, they're just regular people, right? So I saw this Twitter thing that I really liked, and it was calling for people to sign up to cook and clean and watch for the kids of the FDA people reviewing the vaccine. So I'll sign up for that so that somebody can, if someone does all the rest of my work, I could work round the clock and we can get these approved faster. But it just is what it is. You need woman power, you need manpower, you need a lot of that. And you also need to look at the data and look at it really carefully so that nothing slips through, but they're coming.
Right. I've got a question here. I'm not sure who is. Prof. Lai, I would like you to answer that if that's okay, please. And then we'll just quickly round it up.
So the question is, are we really sure COVID-19 is medical or satanic? It says, until we know what we are dealing with, we will be going in circles. So again, this is a pandemic. And fortunately, there hasn't been a lot of pandemics, and the last time there was a real pandemic was 100 years ago, and a lot more people died from the Spanish flu than have died in this time. Thankfully, we are a little bit more advanced than back then, and so and God being so good, we were able to get vaccines within a short period of time, which has really helped. So, I think you can think of it any way that you want, but from a medical perspective, this is a virus that is wreaking havoc. And thank God that He's given us the wisdom and the ability to get vaccines and the know-how to prevent the spread of these, with all the different precautions about, physical distancing, wearing of masks, and avoiding overcrowded, especially indoors. And then the best one is the vaccine. And so I would say this is a pandemic that we're dealing with, and I think the quicker we get through with it and do what is necessary to get rid of it, we will then be fulfilling a self-fulfilling prophecy by saying this is satanic, and so then we'll be going in the circles that the question asker was talking about.
Thank you, Prof. Lai. And Godson Uncle. So Prof. Lai here is our Reverend Minister. Although all my panelists are Christians, Prof. Lai sits here with wearing two hats. He's the Reverend Minister in this session, and again, he's a medical doctor as well. So please take it from him. Thank you very much. And can we look at the next question, please? With explanation given, I feel the COVID vaccines are immune boosters. If there are no guarantee it can combat a new variant. Dr. Bamla, do you think you're able to answer that question, please? Thank you.
I guess I don't understand what they mean by immune boosters. It's not really a medical term that we use in terms of immune boosters. So if you mean that you get vaccinated and it boost your immune system to allow it to fight disease. That's not how vaccines work. You actually have to teach your immune system to make the antibodies against the virus that that you're going to be exposed to. So in that way, you're not really boosting something that was already there, unless you already were already vaccinated. And then you can boost that, although you're actually just creating more antibody on a platform that your body already has created some. So I would just be careful with terminology, especially if using it to say that the vaccines do something that they don't do. They will boost your immune system if you have antibodies to be boosted. But there's really nothing else in medicine that does this, right? We have vaccines. That's just a really unique way of working with our bodies. And then we have drugs that do something different. So, and then in terms of combating a new variant, I think the others have been really great in explaining how, even though the vaccine maybe now, if a new variant came, it may not be able to combat it depending on how the variant changed. We do know now that we can very quickly ramp up and create vaccines to try to combat that. So the fact that something that we have now is not perfect, and I hear this a lot where people don't act like this in any other part of their lives, right? You don't expect any other part of your life to be perfect. And yet when it comes to a vaccine that is trying to help people in a pandemic, like the house on fire, people expect it to be perfect. So I would just really caution against saying that because it may not fight a new variant, then that it's not good, or labeling it as something else. Someone else wants to add on to that. Maybe I didn't understand the question.
I think you did address the question perfectly. I think the person is referring to a lot of things on the market that are being sold as immune boosters. And then I'll say that a lot of these products have not been tested. And when they are being sold as immune boosters, it's just what the person who is selling it is saying. At this point in time, I don't know anything that is an immune booster. I know a lot of people sell herbal products and claim that they are immune boosted. It was very popular in the early part of the pandemic when there were no vaccines. people made a lot of money selling immune boosters when they didn't have any data to support it.
There's one more question from Lily again. I'm not sure who'd like to take it, please.
I think I mentioned about the alpha and the delta variant. You don't need a specific antibiotic for a particular variant. Yes, so there have been many variants, but at this point, there are no antibiotics per se for any variants. It's only antiviral that is being used is the remdesivir. Hopefully, maybe this new Merck drug will be the other antibiotics. Most of the treatments for COVID-19 people are trying to reduce inflammation, especially for patients with their lungs so that they don't die. So the simple answer is that we don't need a specific antiviral type of variant.
Right, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Ayi. Dr. Bumlath, I think I'm going to ask the last question and then we are going to pull the curtains. So it says, after millions of doses of vaccines, what are the known side effects? And I'm even thinking, we don't even know the side effects yet. Why should our children also be rolled into it? So what are the known side effects?
Yeah, so I would say that the vaccine labels are the best place to go look for known side effects. These are reviewed regularly, they're updated. If there's any safety signal, there's all this work going on in the background where we're doing automated searches for safety issues. We're doing manual reviews of these safety issues. And then when one rises to the level of what we call a safety signal, then it gets validated and then it gets put on the label if it's real. So for mRNA vaccines, we know of rare allergic reactions. That's about 2 to 4 per million. If you look at all comers, they've talked about the myocarditis and pericarditis, which is inflammation of the heart muscles or the sac around the heart. There's increased risk we found in males all the way through age 40, but really pronounced more in 12 to 17 age group. But that risk is still also low. It's about 1 in 20,000. On the label for the mRNA vaccines, they've written syncope, which is, when some people are given the vaccine and they pass out. It's not really due to the vaccine, but because it happens when they're getting the vaccine, it's on the label. And really, so that's for the mRNA vaccines. And then for the adenovirus vaccines, which are the AstraZeneca and the J&J, we've seen the rare, very rare, again, blood clots, right, that have happened, at least in the US. J&J was put on hold for a while we really looked into it, and really we found only very few cases per million, right, 6 per million. And then also AstraZeneca has added this neurological condition called Guillain-Barré syndrome, that they've added to their label as well. Again, very rare. We're talking, in the millions. So all these are occurring in vaccinated people. But remember that worldwide, we've had 3.6 billion people have received an mRNA vaccine. You guys, this is like half of the world, okay? So even if something happens 1 in a million, you're going to see a lot of it, and people are going to be on social media saying, well, there were like all these cases. That's because there were so many people vaccinated, and actually what you should be looking at is what the people in which nothing happened. They're fine. They're walking around and they're protected from COVID. So it's always a risk benefit, but people like to look at just the risk without saying, well, why are we taking this risk? We're taking this risk because we're in a pandemic, and the risk of the disease is a lot more. So the myocarditis, for instance, you can get myocarditis with COVID-19. The rate is 16 times higher in COVID-19 than for the vaccine. So it's like, well, pick your odds, right? Pick your odds of myocarditis post-vaccination or myocarditis post-COVID-19. Guillain-Barré syndrome, same thing. So you have to be really thoughtful about when people say there's all these risks. Well, what are the risks of the disease? The only reason a vaccine exists is because the disease exists. So you have to do that. So I would say that bottom line, these vaccines are still considered safe and efficacious because these side effects are happening in such a rare number statistically that your benefit risk is still for the vaccine. There are some vaccines that the benefit risk is not that, and we can talk about those another time. But for this vaccine, it is. So that's really all I had to say about the side effects. Some people ask about the side effects that happen right after the vaccine. Those are really not side effects. Those are what are expected. We call them reactogenicity. You're expected to have a fever. You're expected to have, arm pain, all of those things. That just means that your body is mounting a response. And we don't consider them real side effects, although they happen after the vaccine. So that's my short spiel about why the vaccines are still considered safe and efficacious. It's because they are.
Yeah. So anyway, to let people know, I got my booster dose this past week, and so I got both the COVID booster dose and flu shot at the same time. And actually, the flu shot site was more painful, even though I'll put it, on a scale of where 10 is the maximum pain, I'll say 1 out of 10 on my flu shot side. The COVID side was nothing, and I didn't have any side effects. So this is my third dose. So anyway, anybody out there who's afraid or fearful of getting the vaccine because of what people are saying, I think the important thing to understand is that, just as Dr. Bombla said, about half of the world's population have received, these vaccines. And so if you hear of like negative things, then we should have seen more. I mean, if what they're saying is really true, then half of the population, let's even say half of the people who got it died. I mean, is that what's happening? No. So it's almost like saying that of somebody who flew in a plane and the plane had a crash. And so because of that, all air flights are bad and you're not going to fly anymore. So again, yes, do airplane crashes happen? They do, but the occurrence is very, very rare. And by far, air travel is very safe. In fact, it's even safer than riding in a car, because there are more vehicle crashes than airplane crashes. However, the consequence of an airplane crash is devastating. And so people can make it, look, they can magnify it. However, the truth is that airplane flights are very, very safe. And it's the same thing that we can say about the vaccine. If you had any doubts, look at it. More than half the population of the world has at least received a dose of the vaccine. And if all the things people are saying were true, we would be seeing a lot more havoc around the world. So that's kind of my parting words for everyone who's listening to us.
Oh, Professor Lai, I think that's a brilliant conclusion. Thank you so much. Kimberly R., thank you for this lovely feedback coming through. And I cannot overemphasize the importance of us sharing this message. If in case viewers don't have a Facebook link, you could find this on YouTube as well. So just go to YouTube, please, and then make sure, we should all make sure actually that we are sharing this information. And guess what? We've got some lovely references as well. So you could actually go behind your computer and make sure you are reading the right information. So please do check out these links that we've posted there, and I'm sure you will be blessed indeed. Thank you to my lovely panelists. I know we've gone 13 minutes over time, but I'm honestly blessed. And yeah, your ministry as doctors blesses us each time you come. So God bless you so much. And thank you for making a date with us again today. Now, next week, viewers, we are looking at the prophetics. And that's a very interesting topic. We are going to be doing that for 3 weeks. So please make a date with us next week, 8 p.m. British Summer Time, 7 p.m. GMT. Is that 2 p.m. Central Time, Prof. Lai? Yeah. So make a date with us next week, next 2 weeks, next 3 weeks, as we talk about the prophetics. What is the importance of the prophetics? What's the essence of having that gift of prophecy? Is it to destroy people, or is it to encourage them? Is it to build up people or destroy families? Please make a date with us next week. God bless you, and see you next week. Shalom. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.